in South Africa and all around the world. My name is Skander, and I am a volunteer with Africa for Palestine. For those of us who may not be familiar with Africa for Palestine, also known as A4P, we focus on strengthening African-Palestinian relations and pushing back against apartheid Israel's infiltration and influence into the continent of Africa. We work with solidarity groups, trade unions, political formations, and human rights orgs across the African continent who have our same spirit of progressive internationalism and commitment to standing with other oppressed peoples of the world. Tonight, we are very privileged and happy to be having our presentation on Afro-Palestinian solidarity with Comrade Sanyika Bryant. Comrade Sanyika is the national organizer of the Malcolm X grassroots movement in the United States. The Malcolm X grassroots movement focuses on building self-determination for people of African descent and takes the form of organizing around participatory democracy, solidarity economics, and self-defense. Comrade Sanyika currently works at the Black Organizing Project in Oakland, California, as the lead organizer. He got his initial training with the Labor Community Strategy Center in Los Angeles, also in California in the United States, where he organized bus riders as part of the Bus Riders Union. Comrade Sanyika, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Glad to be on with you, comrade. It's been a minute.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this early. Okay, so why don't we get started, comrade? Our topic for today is Afro-Palestinian solidarity. Just to get us started, can you share with us a bit about your activist work in general, and also specifically in relation to Palestine?
Okay. Yeah, so one, just want to start off by saying that the organization that I'm a part of, the Malcolm X grassroots movement, is part of a broader national liberation movement. We call it the New African Independence Movement. That's the particular tendency within it, but the Black Liberation Movement.
So why don't we get started, comrade?
Okay, heard like playback.
Sorry about that, comrade.
That's all right. Yeah, so we're part of the Black Liberation Movement, more generally speaking. The organization, is the mass formation of the New African People's Organization, which is more of a cadre formation. And we're organized around, attaining, human rights for African people in the United States, and so the work is fundamentally about, self-determination. And we see Black people in the United States fundamentally as a captive nation, right? It's not just, oppressed citizens or anything like that, but like a nation in and of itself, and the work that we do is mainly around trying to, one, like raise the level of national consciousness within our people here in the US, but then also also like to organize around some, real practical things. So like the participatory democracy will look like organizing people's assemblies in different areas of the country, where we can have like a, organized block of people making decisions for themselves, like actually like starting that practice of like, self-determination, self-governance, at least on like a small local level at first, for starters. We do work around supporting cooperative economics. We do work building self-defense networks, protecting protesters, teaching people about, movement security. We have a youth program, the New African Scouts, that trains young people from 6 to 18, give them political education, but then also give them urban and rural survival training as well. We have when there's not a pandemic happening, we have a camp in the Atlanta area called Camp Pumziko. Mm. Every year, where we take the young folks, our scouts from across the country, and it's like a summer camp program for them, where they get to learn these skills from movement elders and veterans, and other people gone through that program. That program's been around since like the late 70s. 1979, I think, is when it was first organized. So that's like some of what the day-to-day kind of work looks like. In relationship to our work around solidarity with Palestine, we really see it as nation to nation work, but we're trying to have like a real people to people grassroots type of relationship, so not like anything like on a state level or NGO type level, but more like the community to the community, type of relationship. That's what we're trying to build. And so that's looked a lot of different ways, so we've done everything from making sure that issues of like Islamophobia in the United States are included when we bring our demands to the United Nations. We had a tribunal out here in Oakland like 10 years ago, coming off of the Oscar Grant movement out here, who was, Oscar Grant was a young African man who was killed by police officer Johannes Messerly in 2009 on New Year's, and it sparked a very strong local movement around police brutality issues. But we MXGM, we helped to organize a tribunal around that case and around extrajudicial killing and political repression in general. And we were trying to make sure that we included, like a wide spectrum of human rights abuses that happen out here, so just making sure that, comrades, our Palestinian comrades' stories are included in that. That was one way. We've done, participated in exposure trips. We've, participated in various, protests and demonstrations when called upon, done joint work on, advocating for political prisoners. That's another thing we share in common, having our leaders, criminalized and, locked away for decades in these prisons, so, we try to find those points of unity and struggle there, really try to educate our communities about them, and there's it ebbs and it flows, like the work does, but we over the decades now, like that's kind of where we've been.
No, I think that's very helpful for us, Comrade Sanyika, to help situate your work. If I was hearing you correctly, I mean, you've been in the game now for, I'm not trying to age you, but I mean, it seems at least 2 decades. And I was actually just reflecting about how I entered and mean, our first connection was about, I think, 7 to 8 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
When we did a panel on I believe it was also Black Palestinian solidarity, um,
Mhm.
also in California. So that was very helpful, Comrade Sanyaka. And yeah, I guess I'd also want to ask, maybe just to situate your context a bit more, and for those who may not be aware, in the United States, most of the country has just officially celebrated Black History Month, which takes place every February.
Mhm.
Can you share with our audience, Comrade, what is the general history of Black struggle inside the USA, and how does it relate to struggles on the African continent?
Okay. So I'll start here. So like our liberation struggle here has taken on historically from the very beginning uh three forms. One form looks like a strategy towards integration into one of the other dominant nations on the land. So either European settler colonial nation trying to get democratic rights there, or even indigenous nations integrating into some of those nations. That's been one particular strategy. Other strategy trying to have a way back to Africa. And the third strategy trying to find a way to govern ourselves here on this land where we're at. Right? So this historically from the 1500s to presently, you've seen different iterations of those three strategies within our movement here, and not just in the U.S. It's like this sort of thing happened pretty much wherever we had, throughout the diaspora here in the Western Hemisphere. Right? And so, early on, of course, you have, the period of our enslavement, like, and you still had those three strategies, you know.
Mm.
A lot of the slave rebellions, though, were organized around not just the individual escape, but like also had the aim of self-governance as well as one of the major goals in the slave rebellions. Like in my particular family lineage, we some of my ancestors fought in what's known as the Second Seminole War here in the United States in Florida. So my family probably was, before the British and before the United States came in, my family was probably enslaved by the Spanish. You know, um, but in that Second Seminole War, it was primarily, it's called the Seminole War, but it was primarily a war of the Africans against enslavement, and became really the only successful slave rebellion in U.S. history in terms of like a mass emancipation of people as a result of a revolt. You know, and so you've got a lot of that history, a lot of struggle for land, a lot of struggle for independence, also struggle to try to get some level of democracy here for our folks. So like directly after slavery, we have the period of Reconstruction, which was really like the United States, like one chance of like an actual revolutionary period. You had people that went directly from the plantation to the halls of Congress, in that period. Like it was a real revolutionary period, but it was sabotaged. Like that's the period where the Ku Klux Klan was originally organized. So like a lot of the gains that were being fought for in that period of time, things like voting, like finally getting voting rights and things of that nature, a lot of that was attacked. People were killed, suppressed in large numbers. um just for, you know, bourgeois democratic rights, not even full, you know, not even like full on like liberatory rights, you know. Um, so we have a lot of that, a lot of that in our history. Um, and you know, I would say currently a lot of the focus that you'll see on the surface is, you know, dealing with you know, the problem of extrajudicial killings of Black people in the U.S. You know, just, you know, large numbers of our people being murdered by the police, um, and law enforcement and security guards and vigilantes. You know, and you know that's a continuation of this history. Um, so that's one of the things that takes on like a very visible character. It's one of the things that here will trigger rebellions most often, you know. But we have all the other issues too. You know, we probably are like the most incarcerated people on the planet, you know, in terms of like a nation. You know, we've got, you know, so many of our people languishing in these jails here, um, which we look at as like another form of containment, another form of, you know, another form of slavery, not chattel slavery, but we're still, you know, we're still laboring and stuff in these jails for, you know, these corporations, you know. um and you know, we, you know, every pretty much every like kind of metric, and every metric, you know, our people are, you know, our people are like suffering like kind of, you know, heavily. You know, and like those types of metrics, when you see that sort of things like health disparities, income gaps, um, you know, access to jobs, education levels, all of that, you know, that's like a, you know, the distinction between us and the, you know, and the settlers here, you know, that's like a colonial reality when you look at the metrics there, you know. So like we look at all of our all of our issues here basically coming down to the fact that we don't control our own lives, you know. And that's something that started with slavery. Like they took away our ability to choose, make choices for ourselves. Fundamentally, that's what it was, you know. we didn't have a we didn't have the a means, unless we, you know, forcefully took it, you know. We didn't have a means of being able to even decide how we related to each other, you know. And so like for us, it's, you know, you know, our ability to define our relationship to ourselves, our ability to define our relationship to the world at large, to be able to determine our friends from our enemies, you know, and act on our own interests. You know, that's what we're fighting for fundamentally,
Mm.
you know.
Sure. No, that was very insightful, Comrade Sanyaka. I think you really broke down well and in a very helpful way the long history of Black struggle and existence in the United States, but also, I mean, just in very practical ways, how what started centuries ago is still alive. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, I mean, as you mentioned, there's always been resistance and there's always been fights for freedom. And in many ways, there's a shared history um, of those types of struggles in South Africa and in Palestine. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, on that note, how is the struggle of Black people in the USA, or even the Americas more broadly, connected to the Palestinian struggle?
Right on. So one, you have two nations of people, or more broadly, if we're talking about, you know, the Americas in general, you know, all these different oppressed nations suffering settler colonialism, suffering from, you know, this political repression period. I mean, one of the things in the US context, like some of our own specific complaints against Zionism. We've had, in the 80s, like the anti-apartheid movement, um, in South Africa, in the United States. A lot of our people here, especially in that previous period of struggle, um, really saw ourselves, directly connected to struggles on the African continent for liberation. And then, Israel had its, the state of Israel had its support for the South African government, and was engaged in spying, like legit spying on organizations in the United States that were supporting, the liberation struggles in Tanzania. you know. So that's one example. Another example, the organization, the student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which was one of the major organizations and youth movements, even, the civil rights era in the United States.
Mm.
They came out with a stance in support of the Palestinian struggle, and the Zionists pulled their funding from the organization, and went defunct because of that.
Mm.
You so we've had some of our major organizations destroyed. One of the things that is happening currently is the training of police in counterterrorism um, in counterterrorism kind of activities in Israel.
Mm.
And so that's a thing that happens. Um, law enforcement agencies across the country will participate in some of those things. So like the same tactics that the Israelis have designed and developed against the Palestinians, they're teaching to the police officers, and even even mercenary groups, because we have that here as well. Quiet as it's kept, it's not just they're privatizing damn near everything. So like you got some private types of iterations of this law enforcement thing going on too. But like they're training all of it. They're training they're training up those law enforcement agencies in those same tactics, and they use them against our people here. There's been, it's talking about the Americas in general. The Israelis have supported right-wing dictatorships in South America, Central America, like in Nicaragua and in El Salvador. you know um it's just, the list goes on and on. um Always being on the side, always ending up on the side of these oppressors, that are, these brutal regimes. They find it in their interest to back them up. you know and not just on their own, not just on their own, as part of, like, this global imperial system. And so it's, we have our own interests against Israel, but then we also have a direct, direct relationship of solidarity with the Palestinian folks. I mean, primarily just on the strength of being another oppressed nation that's not recognized, a nation that has a wide diaspora trying to get home. you know like a lot of those things are things that we can, we definitely connect on. And like it's definitely, um we definitely are looking for, fully liberated Palestine, or all the, looking for the day when the homies can come back home and we can celebrate. you know.
Yes. One day, comrade, inshallah. Um, so I think you laid out a good framework for if I understood correctly, for understanding that inside the United States, in terms of Black struggle, the Zionists have been a force that is actually attempted to suppress Black freedom struggles, and on the other end, the United States, America has been one of the major forces in attempting to suppress the Palestinian liberation struggle.
Mhm.
So there is clearly a common enemy. There is clearly a shared experience of being an oppressed nationality.
Mhm.
Um, but I wanted to know, I'm going off my own script now, because I think we have a shared mutual interest that I wanted to ask you about. So this is maybe more of a cultural, historical question.
Solid.
Uh,
Okay.
how do you see Palestine in relation to Africa historically? Do
Okay.
you, because I mean, I've read some things about people, they've made the argument, they say that, in many ways, Palestine and maybe even Palestine is like Northeast Africa,
Mhm.
right? And there's a long history of what we now call African peoples have always inhabited that place. So, I mean, are there other maybe cultural and historical connections there too?
Yeah, for real. There really, really are. Um, so one thing to say, when the Europeans in the late 19th century um were engaged in their scramble for Africa, you know, Arabia was part of that. Like the whole Arabian Peninsula was part of that plan, those machinations, and so like just geopolitically in the mind of our enemies, we were connected people, right? Historically, you're exactly right. Like I'm a person in general that considers like all like the entire Arabian Peninsula as part of Africa culturally and historically speaking, like going back millennia. We've got the same like same tribes, like just keeping on like tribal like family clan levels, like we've got the same tribes on like both sides of the Red Sea.
Mm.
You know, you've got example like in Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, you have the Rashida people, like the Bani Rashid, right? You got them in Yemen, you got them in the Hijaz, you got them, up in the Levant, same group of people, both sides of the Red Sea, right? You got the Banu Salema, right?
Mm.
Who originally came from Yemen, but live in, you got some Banu Salema in Jordan, you got some Banu Salema in Palestine still, but then you also have Banu Salema in Sudan, right? And they've been in Sudan at least since like the 12th the 12th century at least,
Mm.
and you know folks might if you folks might have heard about, I don't know if it's too obscure or not, but folks might have heard about them in relationship to the fighting that was going on in Darfur, like 2008, 2009, around then, you
Mm.
know, like the Banu Salema was one of the tribes, one of the Arab tribes that were like involved in the fighting in Darfur, and these are, they're Black Arabs, you know, and it's
Mm.
not to say that, not to say that they're Black just because they mixed in with Sudanese people and stuff, like they were Black anyway, you know. Um, and it's, there's so many other tribes like that, throughout. I mean, we've got like in West Africa, just to speak about somebody from West African descent. You've got my little Fulani hats up here, you
Hmm.
know.
Yes, yes. I was
Yeah,
looking at.
like, yeah, that's part of my what's known of my lineage. I'm part Fulani, but the Fulani, have a military alliance with the Banu Salema in Sudan, you know, and it's part of like that shared kind of like nomad cattle herder kind of experience, so there's a whole sector of Arabs in Central and West Africa called the Bagara Arabs or the Shua Arabs.
Hmm.
So you got them in Nigeria, you got them in Chad, you got them in Cameroon, you got them in Central African Republic, you've got them in Sudan. Centuries, long before we were dealing with any kind of like European imperialism, we had these relationships, North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, even into Southern Africa and Mozambique. You got some of this going on.
Hmm.
It's, and that's just the history. This is like this just our legitimate history. Um, and when the Europeans come in and try to, they try to take things over, like they understand that, they acknowledge that, but they look and try to see where they look at the internal contradictions that are already present
Yes,
and
yes.
try to,
Divide and conquer.
yeah, and try to take advantage of that, and it's, there's a lot more to that part of history. It's not a pretty history. It's not, but it's the truth. It's the truth, so like you know there's a lot that can be done, um I think for our folks, like just in terms of like understanding like the depth, like the actual depth of the relationship,
Hmm.
like there's a thing about understanding a person's backstory, that becomes really critical in terms of like really trying to, help people to relate and understand their context. It's
Yes.
like so we got a long relationship with Palestinians. Just to suffice it to say.
Brother from another mother, sister from another mister.
Yep. Yep.
No, I think
Exactly.
I've really learned a lot from you over the years, Comrade Sanyaka. And I think also, shout out to our mutual teacher, Dr.
Dana.
Dana Reynolds. I mean, I find this history very fascinating, and I think we could both continue to talk about this for an hour, but I mean,
Uh,
it's really incredible. I mean, aside from just the political context and a common enemy, I mean, a lot of, and it's come out a lot in the last decade, I think, with the revival of Black Palestinian solidarity in the mainstream.
mm,
But I mean, Palestine is full of not only Black people, but people descendant from the way you described Africa and Arabia always being interconnected.
mhm.
Um, and
Yeah.
it's black Arabs, in many places in the south of historical Palestine, the Bedouin tribes.
Mhm. But it's
It's
Arabin and everybody. Yeah.
I mean it's ancient, more sedentary Arabs who are there in the West Bank and the East
Mhm.
Bank, and then more recent arrivals from religious pilgrimage. I mean, so it's really a very, very rich history. And I think,
Yeah.
as you were alluding to, I mean, it's not without its problems. As a white Arab, I think my fellow white and non-black Arabs don't do enough to acknowledge that there are a lot of problems around racism, and
Mm-hmm.
anti-Black racism within our community and country and heritage, you know? So I think it's, you know, we need to mention these tensions, of course, like you, and work through them seriously, like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, in a way that's not on the oppressor's terms, who's trying to divide and
Right.
conquer.
Right, right. Yeah. Because we have our own, that's the thing when you're coming from a self-determined place, you're acting from like your own, what your actual interests are, your own actual interests, and we as a people, like, and this is like what I was talking about earlier, like trying to deal with it on a grassroots level, like primarily, like, because that's where most of it's gonna play out on like a real people to people, like everyday type of a level, but the more we're able to come together, we acknowledge whatever problems there are, but come to the solution together,
Hmm.
come to the solution together ourselves without our enemy interfering in the process, because that's like an actual enemy, like they've proven themselves, to be dead set against us, you know but us, we can have a non, we might have antagonisms, here and there, but they're not antagonistic, they can be worked out, they're like people to people problems, we can figure that stuff out,
Yeah.
we're not trying, we're not, neither of us are like, conquering and colonizing each other right now, we're dealing with the same folks doing that. That's who we got to attack. The other thing, like any other issues that come up between us, we can deal with that like on comradely kind of terms, like, yeah, and like there's,
Hmm.
like we were talking about just now, like we got centuries and centuries of history, going millennia of history, together, and we were talking about before we went live, we are talking about our mutual brother Roberto in San Diego. And I know he speaks about things in like civilizational terms
Hmm.
a lot of the time, and our peoples were part of the same civilization, for long stretches of our history,
Hmm.
and so like being able to connect on that level, on a civilizational level, I think, I think it's important, it's like, because there's so many different levels we have to rebuild on, you know and there's just so much of our history just, has been lost, and we're rediscovering it together,
Yes. Yes. No, I hear you, comrade. I hear you. Um, okay. So I think we've covered a good amount of the history of um, the Black struggle in the United States, its relationship to Palestine, also Afro-Palestinian solidarity, Afro-Arab historical connections. Maybe we can bring it just a bit more to the current moment.
Mhm.
Um, what do you feel, Comrade Sanyaka, are currently the most pressing challenges facing Black and Palestinian peoples and their attempts um, at overcoming the powers that be? Um, any inspiring recent successes, victories, failures come to mind?
Mhm. Yeah, this is a deep one. um I would I mean, we've got, each of us have got so many issues, but I think, um I mean, and things are definitely shifting in bad directions, with the pandemic and everything, and the climate catastrophe, like all of that is like we're gonna have to contend with that, and those things are gonna be priority for a minute. But I do think that, for Black people here in the US, I think there's a thing that's happening where we we're some of the connections that were made in previous eras of our struggle are not being made currently. So I think there's something happening um now where there's like there's a lack of international focus,
Mhm.
lack of like kind of like international like contextualization of what's happening
Mhm.
domestically. I think that there are severe divisions that need to be healed,
Mhm.
um just like internal to our movement. And I think that one major thing is this contradiction that's come up between people that are organizing, and that have organized more spontaneous type of activity, um and then are trying to get themselves organized afterwards, right, on the one hand, right, and then a lot of the like national like type of formations that come in and like kind of parachute in,
Mhm.
take credit for what was happening, in the grassroots, get hella resources for it, but then the grassroots are left cut and dry, you
Mhm.
know, like, and that I think creates a lot of division and mistrust within our movement in general. And has even resulted in certain people getting politically isolated and then assassinated. Like we have several of the people that were leading the demonstrations in Ferguson all turn up assassinated the exact same way. You
Mhm.
know, um, partially because they've been politically isolated, partially because of the way some of the just some of the way like the national formations have been playing out. They didn't have like a lot of those people didn't have the political cover or the mass cover or the mass support for what was going on locally. And so that allows for the state to come in and pick critical people off. So that's a thing that's been happening, that we need to keep. We need to be very vigilant about. The resurgence of the organized elements of the white supremacist formations. That's another thing we need to be very vigilant about. um there I really cannot stand when when comrades talk about people, our enemy being stupid.
Mhm.
They're not stupid at all. And they've been training for decades. They don't have a decentralized structure.
Mhm.
They have funding apparatus. They have politicians in their camp. They have their own methods of organizing. you know and they're networked up internationally. Like it's a serious thing. And so like that sort of shit that we're gonna have to contend with wherever wherever we're at. Like that's an international problem. Like we're gonna deal with that in France, we're gonna deal with that here, we're gonna deal with it in Brazil. It's the same shit all over the place. They're because they're networked up that way.
Mhm.
In relationship to taking it back to Palestine, like I mean the I mean just the goddamn devastation that's been happening in Gaza right now. I mean, my God, like just the you've already got your people's entire infrastructure destroyed. And then you've got the pandemic, and then you'll have folks aren't getting access to the critical medical resources like the vaccines and everything, on top of having like your infrastructure completely destroyed.
Mm.
hospitals being targeted, and like all that type of thing. So I think getting having is a critical need for international solidarity, and like trying to find some, like, I don't know how, but like finding like the resource networks and stuff, the distribution, alternative distribution channels. Try to, I'm not gonna say it the way I want to say it, but we gotta get shit to people who need it. you know,
Yes.
uh, we gotta figure that out. It's something
By
that's
any
difficult.
means.
Yep. Yep.
We hear you, comrade. We hear you. No, I mean, especially in the current moment, when you just think of the the situation with COVID and
Mm.
vaccines. I mean, to a more or less extent, the vaccine apartheid
Right.
that both Palestinians and Black people and other peoples in the United States are facing, is a very pressing challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I mean, I share a kind of strong pessimism in analysis, so that we can really lay bare the nakedness of what we're dealing with. I think that's very important. But I
Mm-hmm.
also think that there are certain things changing,
Yeah.
um, and there is hope. There is some optimism for whether it's the end of ultimate end of apartheid Israel, or the structures of exploitation in the United States, or it's a move towards more freedom. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's the level of discourse in the United States, for example, has shifted tremendously in the last few
Right.
years.
Right.
From the work of grassroots movement, the stuff that we've been doing for a long time, but also, I mean, at the level of the state, some of the Congress people, the more critical wing, we might say, the progressives, with who are trying to disturb the Democratic Party, taking positions on Palestine that are unprecedented. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just yesterday or the day before, the reporter questioning the White House secretary openly about, what, what do you mean you support Israel, but what about the Palestinians? And continuing to inject, what about the Palestinians? They're an occupying power. They have to provide them support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Here in South Africa, we just had a major victory that I think we should celebrate. We got the Chief Justice, Mokgoy Mokgoy, who, if you've seen videos, I mean, has said some things in the recent past, about Palestine, about COVID, and we recently were able to have him. He's now forced, legally, to apologize for his statements in support of apartheid Israel. He
Mm-hmm.
does have the chance to appeal, but I mean, I think it's still a sign that, look, no, we're still fighting, and there is a future.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Now it's critical to talk about those victories too. It is you're right. It is shifting. It does feel like there's more support for the liberation of Palestine now than there were, just a few years ago. You know, even, I mean, just like on a pop culture tip, the Saturday Night Live skit, a
Mm,
couple weeks ago, just on a pop culture level,
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
talking about the access to the vaccines, and Palestinians not getting it, on a Saturday night live skit in the United States. Hella millions of people watch that stuff, and it's that's not a thing that would have happened before. So you're right, like the climate has shifted a bit. Also on a semi-related tip, um there's more conversations about reparations in the United States now, than there have been before. um so we've got, I mean, even on like a local level, in a lot of different cities, people's like city councils and school boards are talking about different forms of of reparations in response to, they're not coming up with it themselves, of course, they never do, but in response to organizing efforts of community groups over the years, so like there is traction, there is a lot of traction there, that's exciting to see, and like, and definitely things I think uh we can learn from each other about.
No, I mean, just a quick last one. I just learned yesterday or the day before that one of the middle schools where I grew up, in Los Angeles, just changed their name from some, racist, eugenicist, white guy to Dolores Huerta.
Wow, okay.
So these things, of course, I mean, it's the grassroots with radical claims that initiated these processes. But now, people within the system are saying, look, we have to. So maybe on that note, and I think this is unfortunately going to be our last question for you, Comrade Sanyika. What practical advice would you give people, whether they're Black, Palestinian, South African, anyone, to support the struggle against Israeli apartheid?
Mm. One thing is to look at the corporations, right? Like, we need to do more research into the Israeli corporations that operate on an international basis, and then figure out labor campaigns against them. Like, just that's like a practical thing that like common everyday people can get involved with, because we want to be able to design campaigns that people's mamas and their grandmamas can join, like on a mass level, you know um like, we want to be able to find ways for everyday people to like contribute to a thing, so like figuring out the corporations is one aspect of that. I think other aspects, just real practically, is like we need to get like community people in the same room together to talk and like educate each other about just what day-to-day life is like, you know for each other, and dispel a lot of like the stereotypes and myths that folks might have about each other, you know just getting the people in the same room, humanize each other, just on the strength of like, I can put a face to the name now, and then having that process being led by people who are involved in these social movements, and then plug people into, actual campaigns and solidarity work that way. Another thing I would think, um, another thing I would think too, is just in terms of, being very careful about where you get your money from. Very, very careful. You know, don't, we gotta build things that aren't dependent on foundations. We gotta build things that aren't dependent on like, just major donors and stuff. Like we gotta figure ways for our resources to come directly from the people we're trying to work with, rather than, these philanthropists, as it creates, severe vulnerability, and like they'll yank it as soon as they don't, they'll give it to you trying to control what you do. They'll yank it as a form of discipline and punishment, and we, like I said before, like we've had whole organizations destroyed because of stuff like that. Yeah. So, I think all those things are things that, we can practical things that we can do pretty much wherever we're at.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Okay. All right, Comrade Sanyaka. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your time, your insight, brother. I mean, personally, I continue to learn from your generosity and care and revolutionary spirit. So, on behalf of Africa for Palestine, thank you, Comrade Sanyaka. We wish you the best, and yeah, take care. Mask up.
Yes, sir. Sir. More ways than one.
Yes.
All right, my brother. It was really good to connect with you again.
Same here.
All right.
Same here, brother. Okay, take care, comrade.
All
To
right.
our viewers, thanks to all for tuning in. Continue to check out our social media, Facebook, YouTube, and so forth for future webinars on many different topics related to Afro-Palestinian solidarity and other issues. Everyone take care. Have a good night. Good rest of your day. Aman la.
Man, with